this story happened like 125 years ago.
Correct.
And I'm guessing this is going to be new to most of my listeners. I'm not familiar with this case. We're familiar with the Exorcists. My listeners will be familiar with the case of Julia, as told by Dr. Richard Gallagher, a board-certified
Yes.
psychiatrist in New York State. So Clara's this young Radcliffe student. Tell us about what was happening in her life at that time when she first met Dr. Prince and Dr. James and Dr. Hodgson.
Yeah. Well, she was a student at Radcliffe College, and basically she was a very religious young woman, and so to the point where really she had visitations from the Blessed Virgin and from Jesus Christ, and actually Prince, in a book that he later wrote called Dissociation of a Personality, refers to her throughout as the saint. And this is a very saintly woman, and plagued, though, with, as time went on, by this demonic presence. And the demonic presence showed itself first with her not being able to eat, having horrendous nightmares, so she couldn't sleep. She was afraid to go to sleep because of these nightmares that were, to her, incredibly real. And her health suffered for it. And at the time, there was a name for it called neurasthenia. And neurasthenia is where you suffer from chronic fatigue, loss of appetite, insomnia, etc. So she went to Dr. Putnam first, who's a general practitioner. And suddenly she starts describing another state, or he starts seeing another state that she falls into, where she's cursing anything religious. Her face contorts to and remolds to a different face. Her voice changes to this deep bass, explosive voice, and Putnam doesn't have a clue what to do with this. So he turns it over to Prince and the famous William James, who studied abnormal psychiatry, thinking, I said, in other times, clearly this would have been called demonic possession. I don't know what to call it now, but these are all the symptoms. And so Prince took on the case along first by himself. Then when he became convinced it was sort of an earth-shattering case, in the sense that, imagine again, Harvard University, these Harvard Medical School professors, able to study in real time, close up, a woman that is showing and displaying all the signs of demonic possession, and in a clinical atmosphere. So it's really a one-of-a-kind story.
Is it fair to say that Prince, like many scientists, because as you point out, he was trying desperately to prove that Clara's case was one of disassociation. In other words, there was a psychological illness here. This was not supernatural. So fair to suggest that he was probably like a materialist?
Yeah, very much so. As a matter of fact, he really is probably considered, if Freud is considered the father of psychoanalysis, which he is, Prince would be considered, I think, the father of behavioralism, a behavioralist approach. You say materialist, but you're very much materialist. He and Freud, by the way, had a rivalry going on, a tremendous rivalry for the direction of psychiatry. Would it go towards Freud's theories of psychoanalysis or Prince's theories of behavioralism? And so they didn't get along very well. And once Interpretations of a Dream came out, which was a landmark work for Freud, Prince looked at this case as incredibly important to shine the light of science into something that had been considered superstition by some people and a religious experience by others. So it was a unique window for him.
So tell me more about Clara Fowler. I mean, how many sessions did she have? And what other behaviors did she exhibit that suggested a genuine demonic possession? I mean, were there things like levitation, superhuman strength?
Yes, exactly. Well, for one, voices. She spoke in different languages that she couldn't possibly know, things like Aramaic, things that she couldn't possibly know. She spoke in different voices, clearly a bass voice of a man, for example, and others where there'd be several voices, like almost fighting for a presence. I mentioned the remolding of the face so that her face really changed to the point where it seemed like another person. She showed signs of clairvoyance. She predicted, for example, that Prince had a horse that he favored, that was his life. It was his hobby and his life, this horse. And she said, your horse will die. And 2 days later, it got run over by a car, that kind of thing. Telekinesis. But really, again, because they had this unique window to truly study, William James carried out experiments, let's call them, while she was in the demonic state. She felt no pain. She had no need of sleep, was awake 24/7, could tell the dreams of the first personality, everything about the first personality. Had no need for food or water, was never ill. It despised, hated the saint, the original personality, the original Clara Fowler, and would write her letters. She'd wake up in the morning with money destroyed, her money would be ripped up, and there'd be a letter that said, you're a hypocrite, you're a whore, you need to put a bullet through your head. I want this body. This body is mine. And there was a true contest to see who would control the body, because what the demonic presence figured out was the weaker she was, the easier it was for it to take control. And so there'd be large sections of missing time where the first original Clara Fowler had no idea what she did or what went on. And during those times, there were things that I don't want to give away too much of the book, but
Right.
Murder was part of it.
This was her father,
Yes,
who had reportedly murdered 2 children.
yes,
Would these be
her siblings,
her siblings?
her siblings. And actually, there was what my favorite character actually is a guy named Rufus Bassett Hilliard, the city marshal from Fall River. And they called him Bassett because he was like a basset hound. Once he locked his teeth into something, he got to the bottom of it. This was the same, and this is what makes it so weird. This is the same city marshal that investigated the Lizzie Borden murders
Wow.
in Fall River. Not 4 or 5 months later, within a couple of miles of the Lizzie Borden axe murders, another axe murder happened that he investigated. A fellow named Juan Corriaro, who was a farm worker, murdered the wife viciously murdered the wife of his boss in her kitchen with an axe. So you had 2 vicious axe murders within a couple of miles of one another, within 6 months of one another. And by the way, a short time before that, there were the murders of two of Clara Fowler's siblings.
And also then we have, in terms of the timing, Jack the Ripper is happening in and around the same time.
Yeah, right. If you look at it, and this is kind of the way I do look at it, I think it's almost like between H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, and Jack the Ripper, and the murders that I'm describing here. It's almost like a kind of virus was unleashed. Some kind of, these were acts of violence that no one had ever seen before. I mean, there was nothing like Jack the Ripper or H.H. Holmes or Lizzie Borden or Corriaro. This is like an eruption of evil.
Right. And again, without giving too much of the book away, there's a suggestion here that these are all somehow related and perhaps having to do with some sort of a demonic possession.
Richard, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Jack the Ripper actually wrote a letter to that city marshal, Bassett. It's on display in a museum in Fall River. But he actually wrote a letter to the the city marshal who was investigating the Lizzie Borden and Coriara murders. Isn't that incredible?
That is